Something that was surprising to me is that infatuation is a real thing, new relationship energy is a real thing, and it's kind of fleeting. I had a lot of relationships in which I really thought, like, oh my God, I'm like falling in love with this person. I would be like so into the person, and then, a few days later, the new relationship energy was gone or the infatuation was gone.
Welcome back to Openly Podcast, lovers and friends. This interview is going to be a really good one. I have another podcast host with me today, Fernanda, who is the host of Polycurious. She is currently a New Yorker, but she hails from Mexico, and we have a lot in common. So I just want to welcome you to the show, Fernanda.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and really looking forward to chatting today.
Yeah, same. So I want to jump right in and sort of ask you, growing up in Mexico and then just coming to the US, you know, for like higher education. Do you had any idea like what non-monogamy was before sort of landing in New York City?
Not really. Well, to backtrack a little bit, I didn't come directly from Mexico. I actually left Mexico when I was 16 and I went to India because I got a
Mm.
scholarship to go to, it's called United World College, but basically they have colleges around the world. And I just happened to get the scholarship for India. I could have gone to Texas or Hong Kong or, Italy, but they sent me to India. And then I went for my undergrad to Amsterdam. And then after that, spent a little bit of time in Cuba because I'm half Cuban. And then I came to New York for my master's. So, I think that traveling around, or rather living around the world, made me very open minded in general. And I think that also growing up in a Cuban family, even though I lived in Mexico, Cubans are a lot more liberal in my experience, less conservative. So I remember, even though my mom or my family were never talking about non-monogamy specifically, my mom would let my boyfriends like sleep over when I was like, you know 15 years old, or my friends, or I had a very liberal upbringing in general, so I've always been like a curious, open-minded person. But it just didn't make sense to me that if you like really love someone, you would want to be with someone else, because my experience of love up until that point, I mean, mind you, I also came to New York not too when I was kind of young, like what was it, like 23 or 24. So I hadn't even had that much experience really, dating or anything like that. So my understanding of love was, when you really love someone, you just want to be with them. um, but then I arrived to New York and immediately got kind of pulled into the Burning Man community, because I literally met someone in the plane as I'm like arriving to New York, who introduces me. He wasn't non-monogamous, but he just introduced me to this whole world and community. And of course, the Burning Man community has a lot of um, it touches a lot with the non-monogamous community. So I made friends with people who were in non-monogamous relationships, and that's when I started becoming more open about it, because I started having conversations with them about it and seeing how they did it. And that's when the idea kind of was introduced into my head, but it wasn't something that I never ever thought that would be for me, or that I would be, that I would have a podcast about.
Yeah. So did you go to Burning Man after meeting this friend?
So I did not go immediately, but I did
Mhm.
go like a couple of years later. And that's where I met my partner 4 years ago. So yeah, we met at Burning Man. We've been together for 4 years now. And yeah, it just felt like it was meant to be.
Oh, beautiful. Um, so we do have a lot in common because I go to Burning Man every year. Um,
I know when
except
we
for
were
the
setting up this interview, I was like, sorry, things have been crazy about Burning Man. And like, I didn't know at that point. And then you're like, you also didn't respond immediately. And you're like, sorry, just came back from Burning Man. And I'm like, oh, okay,
yeah,
you too. Okay, cool.
I was like, I'm gonna be off the grid for like several weeks. So, but it is interesting. I had someone DM me on my open late account, which actually currently while we're recording this is restricted. And I'm not sure why, with like no explanation, it got restricted from Instagram. But someone DM'd me and was like, I heard Burning Man is more of like an art scene than it is like a sex scene. And I was like, yeah, who told you it was a sex scene? But I guess like the evolution of what people perceive Burning Man to be is this like, sexually liberated, and also just like liberated space period, right? It's like, radical self-expression is one of the 10 principles of Burning Man. But the history of Burning Man is that it's a place to sort of share and be inspired by art, and sort of the whole, um, for me at least, my experience of it, sort of sexually, it's become even more and more charged as the years go on. But that's definitely not a bad thing, I think, because many people are having experiences there, that they would otherwise not have the space to, or feel sort of the invitation to. And aside from sex, like there's so much, love there, which I think can exist in two very different spaces or come together. So it's cool that you met your partner there. I know so many people that met at Burning Man and are married now, like multiple relationships. And I was actually there in two instances where I watched friends meet. I was there for their meeting initially, and now they're married, which is like so wild. And I love when that happens.
Yeah, Seth, my partner, has a couple of friends, so two couples who also met, and he was there when they met, and they're great friends of ours. But yeah, people's comment about Burning Man when I tell them, I met my partner there, they're like, oh, it either like, I haven't heard that. It normally doesn't work out because you know i- it's like any festival when you are in a different state of mind, and whatever, you connect with someone and then you go back to reality and things might be different. And I know that a lot of people also has that experience at Burning Man. They have a burn love and then they go back and it's not like that. But there's also the other side. Like I think in my case with said, like, honestly, I don't know if we would have met if it hadn't been at Burning Man, because he was in a very like relaxed um way of being that's like not normally his like default. So he was like more prone to like connect, but like we were both in like a very open and like honest space, and that allowed us to connect like very deeply, very fast, and to really like see each other for what we were, which when you meet someone in the real world, there's no, it takes you a little bit longer to actually peel back all the layers and get to the core of who they are. So yeah,
Totally.
it was a beautiful, beautiful experience.
Yeah. I love how you put that, because it really is a place where, especially the longer you're there, the more time I feel like you spend in the desert, because there's people who could come in for like 3 days and 4 days, we call them the weekend warriors. Like it takes a little bit to settle in, but I find that the longer you're there or the more you go back, it's like you just slowly take the masks off and the identities and everything you feel like you need to be or show up as in the everyday world. At Burning Man, none of that matters. It literally doesn't matter like who you are, what you do, how much resources you have. It's really just about the connection there. The more connected you can be, it's almost like that's the currency, right?
Yeah, and I
um,
think last comment about Burning Man, I think that also something that people don't really get, going back to the how people see it as opposed to how it actually is. is that what's really important. The art, I agree with you that the art is an important part of it, but it's an important part because people are collaborating to bring that art and give it back to the community. So it's about community, but also like the fact that there's no money and no service. To me, that's what really makes Burning Man. The fact that,
Yeah.
I mean, in a way it does, you can see the money differences. I mean, especially this year because it was so hot, so then the people who had AC and the people who didn't have AC and things like that, you can definitely, it's not like money doesn't exist, but it doesn't exist at the burn. So like you are not exchanging money, you can have so many experiences and so many connections, and yeah, and just let go of your phone and like have real conversations with people. And to me, that's what really makes Burning Man different and special.
Yeah. I love how you said last comment about Burning Man. Like, no, we could talk about it all day. We don't have to
Well,
stop.
I mean,
We,
I'm happy to talk about it all day, but if you want to move on,
yeah.
we can as well.
I was going to ask you, do you think you'll have a Burning Man wedding with Seth?
Well, I did ask him, and then he was like, "I don't know, babe," because like Burning Man it's already a lot of work, and like
Yeah.
I feel like organizing a wedding at Burning Man would be a lot of work as well. And as much as I feel like I've gotten so much out of Burning Man, and I'm definitely going back. I'm also having, especially the environmental aspect of it, which is also something that
Yeah.
I worry about, and I feel like it would be even worse if I had to organize a wedding.
Mm-hmm.
But all the waste that is produced from Burning Man, it's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I wouldn't want to add to that with a wedding, but maybe we could have like a chill wedding ceremony. But
Yeah.
I don't know, I would have to convince Seth first.
I feel you. I went to 3 weddings this year and they were all like camp mates of mine. So it wasn't even like, there these extensions of whatever where I was like, oh yeah, maybe I'll go to that wedding. These are all people that I've known for 5, 7 years that I like care deeply for and that I know well and that I didn't want to miss these beautiful like days of theirs, right? But at one point it was like Thursday and I was already at my 3rd wedding and I was like, this is a lot. Um, but yeah, I Burning Man was tough this year. I'm
Yeah.
gonna record a whole bonus episode about it. But this was the first time where I ever considered like not going back, and had the thoughts of like maybe this kind of chapter, this experience for me has like run its course.
How many
But it's
times have you
interesting.
been?
This year was my 7th, I think, or it might have
Mm-hmm.
actually been my 8th.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I love it, but it is such an undertaking and it's evolved obviously like over the years as any,
Yeah.
large scale city does. And it's like such a social experiment. So, you can't be mad about things changing and growing and evolving, because it's just the nature of it. But I was like, is this the experience that I still want to have? And I'm part of a really big camp, and we have a really big offering to the burn, multiple actually every year. So it's just a ton of work that goes into it. And I was like, I'd rather have a really small, intimate experience. So I'm thinking about all of that and what that means. But, I have time to make these decisions. Meanwhile, my husband wants to make an art car. So I'm like questioning whether or not I'm going. And he's like, oh, I'm going. And I'm building like a new massive piece, of metal that we'll bring. And I'm like, oh, there's so much more work.
It is
But
a
it
lot
is what
of
it is.
work, but I would love that experience building an art car and then getting to like ride around with it and have that offering. I have some friends who just built one and it was just really sweet to go and see it, and they were really happy with it. But yeah, it's tons of work, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Well, we'll circle back. We'll see if we're going next year and we'll have to find each other.
Yeah, but it's
Um,
definitely changed even from, I mean, I've only been 3 times, 2018, 19, and then 2022, and I definitely see it changing. And yeah, I don't know. I
yeah.
think that for me, I want to see if like next year I can do more to make it more sustainable. So at least I feel like I'm contributing in that way. But I mean, it's not just that, it's just, it's Instagram, it's becoming like more mainstream. It's a lot of
Totally.
things. It's the heat,
Yeah.
global warming is getting so much hotter.
Yeah, I know. And I love the heat, but this year I was like, can we move the
I know.
burn? Like it's just like cuz one of my favorite things to do is go out during the day. Like I
I
love to
know.
see you can see so much more art, during the day and you really get to kind of take it all in and there's a lot to experience. But we were really limited this year. I mean, you just couldn't stay out there for long or I mean so I know so many people that got heat stroke. My husband did actually, but let's move on. This whole episode will be about Burning Man and then we'll have a part two. But so I do want to I want to know about how it was for you to sort of be introduced right to such a community, right, this polyamorous community that you or the Burning Man community that you really got to meet a bunch of people through um, as someone who was like not coupled up at that point. So did you start dating and dating in like a non-monogamous fashion at that point?
Yeah, so from those friends that I met, I kind of started to go to play parties and yeah, I would date and like especially well, so actually the person that I met when I just arrived, we started seeing each other and we were monogamous. And then at some point I was like, okay, I kind of felt like I needed to take a break. And then the moment that we did that and I was single for the first time in New York, because my background in the other schools that I've been in India and Amsterdam, it was like for some reason it was like 70% women and 30% men. And like it was just I wasn't dating much or like exploring much before that. So the moment that like floodgate open, I was like, okay, I just want to have fun. And I was kind of making it very clear to the people that I was seeing, like, this is not this is not serious. I want to do my own thing. I still had people like who were heartbroken, because something that I learned with time, like even if you tell them and you think everything's clear, if you spend time with them and act in a certain way, they still felt like they had some rights over me, or they still just had
Yeah.
feelings for me or whatever. So also something that I've learned, and I think that now that I have a partner, it's a lot easier, because there's a constant reminder that we won't become primaries, because I already have a primary. But when I didn't have a primary, it was more difficult. So yeah, so I was doing that for like maybe a year or two, until I met Seth, and I was like, okay, I want him to be my primary. But before that, it was, yeah, like I guess like solo poly, as they call it, exploration.
Yeah. That's such an interesting point that you make. I have never had that experience because I only entered into, the non-monogamy world after, meeting my now husband and being in a monogamous relationship with him that we opened. Um, but even dating, I have that, the similar type of energy where like I've dated guys before who are convinced that there's something wrong with my relationship and that's sort of why I'm dating or which then I never end up dating them if I notice that that's sort of their idea of what's happening. That's kind of a red flag for me and someone who's not like understanding of what polyamory really is or non-monogamy or consensual non-monogamy. So I wouldn't go down the road with somebody like that. But I've experienced a lot of sort of that. So I can only imagine that being, solo and uncoupled at that time, you would meet a lot more, or maybe not a lot more, but you come up against the resistance of, the sort of mononormativity where someone's like, oh, yeah, cool. Like, me too, Polly. Or, I totally understand and I'm comfortable with it. But at the same time, trying to, or subconsciously even moving towards monogamy when you're like clearly communicating that's not what you want. Um, so it's interesting.
yeah, that definitely happens. And then it just, for me, the lesson was I cannot believe what they say.
Yeah.
Like, and I have to be like, it's not enough for me to just, of course, like, once I'm clear about my intentions, it shouldn't be on me. But that doesn't take away the fact that if I hurt them, I'm going to feel bad about it. So that means that I have to guard myself from that, and like not only take at face value what they tell me, but just kind of check where they are at, and if they're getting like too much into me and I'm not feeling like we're on the same level. I've often had to, even now with a partner, I've often had to like break things off because then I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think that's like one of the biggest challenges actually of non-monogamy, right? Or polyamory. It's like it's such an open space of sort of different stages of relating and emotional intelligence that often you don't meet people that are sort of at the same like level as you, because there's so many realms I think to go and grow through, right? So people are like, yeah, I'm also polyamorous, and then I meet them and I'm like, they're a very different type of polyamorous than me, or they're calling themselves polyamorous and maybe really not fully what I would think is like polyamorous, right? And not to be judgmental, because there's no real right way, I think, to practice. It's like everyone has their version that works for them. But I think that's one of the sort of unforeseen challenges where it's like monogamy is kind of monogamy, right? Everybody, like, there's this very, mononormative society that we live in, and these expectations are very clear and communicated. And so it's almost like sometimes you feel like you're in the Wild West with non monogamy. And I think our experiences of it and our language of it is still so limited. So, we're sort of forging that path, and hopefully, podcasts like yours and mine are very educational, I feel like, and also sharing real stories from real people all the time, which is one of the reasons that I loved your show and I was super drawn to it. Um, but yeah, it's like you can hear what someone says, but you really have to be there for their actions and for their energy to really be able to tell if, they're in alignment with you and if dating them is the best option, right?
Yeah, and I should also say that I think you are right. We're very limited with our language, but I think the distinction between non-monogamy and polyamory is kind of important, because I actually do not consider myself polyamorous, and I think that making that distinction, it's also helpful in my case, because I can say my expectation of dating you is not really to have a partnership with you, is to have friends with benefits, or to date casually, or I call myself open rather than polyamorous, because to me polyamorous implies like the possibility of having like a romantic partnership outside of my own. And not to say
Mm-hmm.
that I haven't had romantic feelings for the people I've dated, but I'm rather, and this is where the name of the podcast comes from, like I'm rather polycurious, like I'm curious about what that would be, and I'm not closed to that happening, but that's not what I'm looking for. Like I prefer non-monogamous arrangements, open arrangements, however you want to call them, like casual, friends with benefits, that type of thing. But yeah, I think that
Yeah.
it's important to have those conversations like early on, and that was definitely a lesson for me.
Yeah. Now, do you and Seth currently sort of practice in the same way? Like, is it pretty much on the same level of how you date outside of your relationship? And are you, um, is your relationship sort of where you're primary partners and you're moving towards building a life together, sort of that style, and planning to, remain open? If you can take us through sort of those steps or those plans or those agreements that you have.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, and this might strike you and your listeners as a surprise, Seth is monogamous, so far at least. So he, of course, has the option if he finds someone attractive to pursue that. But he's just a lot more of an introvert, and he just feels like satisfied with what we have, and he enjoys his solo time more than chasing girls around or getting on dating apps or whatever. And I interview him on my podcast, episode 12 of the first season, if people want to check it out, and we go in depth of like his reasons for that. um but yeah, the way we view our relationship is as primaries and as life partners. We both know that that might change, and are aware of that possibility, but we're very much planning our lives together, and potentially getting married and having kids, and that's how we approach our relationship.
Beautiful. And so what's like, I would love for you to share. I've heard some of this, but I think it'll be cool for my listeners. Um, Other people's responses to hearing that, right? That he is happy remaining monogamous and you're, very open and exploring and dating outside this relationship. Like, what do like family and friends say when you share that? Or even your listeners, I guess, of the podcast, like what's the response been?
Well, I'm very glad that a lot of the listeners, or at least the people in the community, in my community, who listen to it and who have like approached me, and even people who've sent me messages, like, are just like grateful to, especially women, are grateful to hear the story of like a woman who's open and who has a close partner, because what a lot of couples run into is that one of them wants to be open and the other one doesn't. But there's this like kind of like pressure, societal pressure, that like they either both should be open, or this like idea that the man is always the one who wants to be open. And the reality is that we are as horny as men are, or as
Yeah.
exploratory. And and I wanted to like show, because Seth is just like an incredible partner in the way that he has supported my journey, and is very rare. Because he's really not, I mean, sometimes I joke that he's more of a feminist than I am, because I don't know, maybe because he grew up with four sisters. so
Oh,
uh
yeah.
so I think that might have to do with it. But he's just he's not sexist at all, and he's very supportive of my journey. So there's been some definitely positive, but like those are the people who listen to the podcast and hear him say that, right? And then there's people who
Mhm.
haven't listened to our episode together, and then they just ask me. And then well, for example, my mom, and probably my sister and my cousin, like, they were like thinking that Seth was just doing it for me, like to stay with me, but that he didn't actually want to do it, and that I was kind of forcing his hand a little bit. With time, and like after the episode was out, and yeah, my mom doesn't speak English, so she unfortunately cannot hear it from Seth's words. But now she understands that uh, he truly is okay with it, and that he truly sees the benefits of it, and that I'm not forcing his hand, and I'm not putting my relationship at risk. She was like really worried that I was playing with fire, and this would end up in me breaking up, in us breaking up. But I
Yeah.
think now people, yeah, I mean, that's also why I want to be open about it, because I think the more open you are and the more you explain, the more people are able to understand it. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people who still think that, but they don't come to tell me like on my face, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who just think like I'm taking advantage of him or something like that, which is not at all the case.
I think it's so important to showcase all the different types and styles of practicing, and that, as you're saying, there is no one way to do it. And it's totally normal. And people are practicing all the time where one partner is monogamous, one partner is open, or one partner is really polyamorous and the other is like just open or monogamous or whatever. And yeah, to challenge the societal, norm of, oh, it's always the man that wants to open the relationship and have other, you know, explorative relationships and sexual partners and things like that. And it's just not that way. Everyone is unique and special, and it doesn't matter if you are a man, woman, or anything in between. Like, it just doesn't. So I think that's really cool. I want to ask you because it sounds like you are out to some of your family, but I know that you're not out in like all of the different areas of your life. If you can speak to the reasons why, because I I know just based on my listenership, right? Like, as I'm sure you do too. I have a lot of listeners who have been practicing for years and years, and they're, don't have the ability, the privilege, whatever it is, the safety to come out. Um, and your podcast too is a platform. You've interviewed a lot of people who are not out publicly. I love your artwork, by the way. When you have people that aren't out publicly, the art that you
Yeah,
sort of
that's
create.
Mariah, my
Yeah.
co-host, my
Oh,
occasional co-host. She makes the
she does.
artwork. Yeah,
Oh,
by,
that's
well,
so
not by
cool.
hand, by iPad pen, or however you say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, she's so talented. I love that stuff. I was like, oh, this is really cool. But yeah, can you speak to sort of the decisions about coming out to some, members of your family or community and not others?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that I just have always had a closer relationship to my mom, and we've always talked about sex, and we've always talked about all sorts of things. We're like really good friends in a way, which is awesome, and I'm very fortunate in that way. As I said, like, she still had a little bit of like judgment, but just because she hadn't been exposed to the idea, and once I explained things to her, and she saw that, we've been together for so long and we're happy and we're doing great and all of that, she's like open minded, and she was able to understand it. So I'm grateful that I have that sort of relationship where I can have those conversations. With my dad, my parents are divorced, have been divorced since I was 4 years old. So I do have a good relationship with my dad, but we've just never talked about my relationships with other men, and I doubt that he would with other men or women. Oh, that I must say, like, my mom is actually not super open about that aspect of my exploration. So that's something that we don't talk about. I assume that she knows, or she has suspicion, but it's also not a big aspect of my exploration, at least not at this point. So yeah, so there's the play party and the exploration with women aspect is the part that I'm still not talking to her much about, but she knows I'm open. And yeah, with my dad, I just don't feel like he first of all, he does speak English, so he could totally listen to my podcast, unlike my mom, who cannot, unfortunately at the same time. And yeah, we've just never had that sort of relationship, and I'm just trying to avoid judgment and awkward conversations. And at the same time, I'm an advocate to like have those conversations when you think there's openness and receptiveness on the other side. But it's not the conversation I feel like having, like, at a Christmas um, gathering or whatever with my family. Oh, I heard you have a podcast about your open relationship with your boyfriend, like, and my aunts and uncles like asking me about that. Like, I just don't feel like going through that. It's not so
Yeah.
much that I fear that I would be harshly judged, or I might be a little bit judged, but honestly it's not so much about that. It's just like I don't want to have to deal with that. And then for my work, yeah, I'm not open about it, because my the co-founders of my company are religious and obviously like more sheltered in their thinking, and they're great, amazing people, and I get along with them great, but I wouldn't want them to listen to the podcast and then hear all the details about my sexual life. Yeah, I also work in podcasting, so I don't want my name to be associated with my company. Like, I don't want my Polycurious identity to be associated with my company, because that could have repercussions on it. So yeah, so it's those are my reasons.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Um, really hoping for the day when, a polyamorous identity wouldn't really mean anything, like wouldn't have repercussions um, for any reason, like regardless of, who's finding out or who's listening.
I
And
mean,
we
I
were a
think
little
we're
bit
not
of
too
a ways
far.
off from that. But yeah, we're not. I think the more we sort of share in spaces that are safe and continue to invite people out of the closet, like, as we both know a ton of people that are closeted and practicing, the more people who feel that, like, safety and security to have the courage to come out, the more you sort of can't ignore that so many people are practicing. Like, it's not a fringe thing. And it's certainly, not some deviant group of people, judging by like all of our guests, right? Who are just some of the most normal, even boring. I always joke that I'm like the boring polyamorous person on the internet, because like I'm hardly ever having sex with like any of my partners. I can't really make that joke actually towards the end of this year, because I've been having a bit more fun. Um, but it's so true. Like, once we start to really destigmatize sex in general, but also to like separate like non-monogamy and sexuality, because for many people it's just about intimacy and having like many other needs met other than sex. So, but you're right, we are on the road and we're not that far off.
Yeah, I mean, you probably heard Esther Perel talking about this as well, or other people, I'm sure. How also, just because of the time of day we're living in, like, we used to live in community, and I think that helps relieve some of the non-monogamous need that we have right now. Like, now we put like so much on our partner, and before we had like a community of people who would like help you take care of your kids, and kind of like have more of a support network. And also, like, as women, we have contraceptive now, so we don't need to carry other men's babies if we decide to have sex with them, so like all of these things are just making it, I feel like society is moving towards that direction. And I'm not saying in the future everyone's going to be non-monogamous, not at all, but it's just, yeah, it's just going to be a more normal thing, although I'm also aware that it does feel like we're progressing a lot in our circles, right? Like, you're in LA, I'm in New York, in the Burning Man community, but you might ask someone in like a midwestern town or whatever, and I also have a lot of listeners who are from there and who are having a really hard time finding community and being open about it. So you know it is progressing, but there's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I would love to just know from, your perspective as a podcast host and a producer, what's really your goal for your show?
Yeah, well, I think one of the goals is a little bit of what I shared about before, like showing not just my relationship structure, but showing that there's different, very different ways of structuring your relationship, and that one has to think about what one wants and what your partner wants, and kind of make a decision. And the options are not monogamy or non-monogamy. The options are, you know all sorts of types, and it's really hard to know what you want if you haven't heard it or you haven't seen it. Again, like, I didn't think I would be open to non-monogamy until I met my friends who were doing it, and I saw it and I heard their stories. So my podcast is like my attempt to put those stories out there and show people, this is an example of how it's done. You don't have to do it that way, but I'm sure you'll hear some things and resonate with them, even if you are monogamous. Like, relationships are relationships, communication is communication, and there's so much to learn from that type of structure, and the challenges, and yeah, just kind of like being more honest about where you are at and where your partner's at, and if that's different places, and as you said, if like one is more poly and the other one is more non-monogamous, okay, well, how would that look like, and how can we make sure that we are as much as possible fulfilling our needs. So yeah, it's just having people feel like they can be themselves in their relationships, and that there's a way to actually make that happen for themselves, but they need to put some work in. So I'm interviewing people who are putting the work in, and who have the resources to help others find the type of relationship that works for them.
Hmm. I love that. Um, okay, one last question. What has been the biggest surprise for you about yourself in the space of your relationships and, being open?
Hmm. Well, something that was surprising to me is that infatuation is a real thing. New relationship energy is a real thing, and it's kind of fleeting, And I had a lot of relationships in which I really thought, like, oh my God, I'm like falling in love with this person, even though, like, again, never had someone I consider my partner, and I've tried to keep things pretty casual. I also don't date super often. Um, but I would be like so into the person, and then a few days later, the new relationship energy was gone, or the infatuation was gone, and just like every single time I would again meet someone, and I would again have those feelings, and I would again believe it. And then it took me like, I don't know, it took me like four people or five people to actually now know that when I feel those things, are they might just literally be hormonal, and and it might go away, and it doesn't mean that my primary relationship is at stake, and it does not, um like, now I'm better able to enjoy it, instead of like project too much into the future and get worried about what that means,
Hmm.
and what that might mean for my relationship. um yeah, it's definitely come with practice. So that was surprising. Another thing that was surprising is realizing that um I don't think I want polyamory, and I very much prefer, like, again, like a friends with benefits situation. I don't, again, I'm still not close to polyamory. I don't think that's something that I can necessarily choose, because tomorrow I might meet someone who I might really want to have something more serious with, and if I'm just dating around, even if I want to keep it casual, that's meant to happen, right? What I do know,
Hmm.
or I'm pretty confident about, is that because I have a relationship structure that allows me for that exploration, I don't think that that's going to, um, I don't think that's going to, if Seth and I ever break up, that's not going to be the reason, I don't think. And even though I knew that, like, there's always that fear, because that's what society has told us, right? That if you're cheating, it's because there's
Right.
something, or like, not, I'm obviously not cheating, but if you are with someone else, it's because there's something growing in your relationship. And if you develop feelings for someone else, that means that that's subtracting from your feelings for the other person. So even though I wasn't like feeling that, and I still was very much in love with Seth, whenever like I had feelings for other people, I would like freak out a little bit, thinking that that would affect my relationship. But then if you think about it, my relationship structure allows for that, and it's not subtracting any love that I have for my partner. So that was like not surprising necessarily, because I knew it, but that was like, w- it took some experience to reach that point of understanding. But yeah, it definitely gets easier with time. obviously my situation is different because I'm not said is monogamous, so my journey is probably very different from like the journey of someone whose both partners, uh, whose partner is doing also, it's also being non-monogamous. But yeah, definitely, like everything in life you learn with from experience, and it only gets easier. So if for your
Yeah.
listeners out there who might be struggling, you don't necessarily need to give up. You learn with time. Just be present and don't overthink too much, and know that as long as you are getting consent from your partner, if that's your relationship structure and you are being honest and communicative, like there's nothing to worry about.
Mm, yeah, so beautiful. And I know everyone listening can really kind of take that to heart and take that advice actually to the relationship bank, because it's true. And where you are today in your non monogamy journey is certainly not where you're going to be 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, even if the sort of container and structure stays the same. You'll continue to evolve and grow in it. And things that feel challenging now, if you continue to work on them and do the inner work, um, they get easier and easier, and things get more and more fun. So,
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
curious, how long have you been open?
9 years.
nine
Yeah.
years yeah.
Today, actually, well, we've been married for a little over 8. And we had our first sort of non monogamous experience 6 months before we were married. Um, so, yeah, very early on in our relationship. So, yeah, yeah.
Can't wait
It's been a
to
wild
hear more
journey.
about it on my podcast. So we'll have that opportunity. But yeah,
Yeah,
9 years
can't wait to record.
is definitely some time to learn a lot of things, I'm sure. I mean, I think for me it's been 5 or 6 years, and yeah, it's been quite the journey.
Yeah. Well, Fernanda, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your experiences and your wisdom. For everyone listening, definitely go check out Polycurious. We are going to link Fernanda's podcast on in the show notes, and the Instagram account, so you can kind of find the information that they share, and lots of fun quotes from your episodes, which I think are really valuable. And then, yeah, I'm going to be on the show as well. So I will definitely let all of you know when that's happening.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. This was really lovely.
Yeah, we'll talk soon. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and sort of taking all of the wisdom and advice from all of my guests. I really just, I'm always in awe of the people who come on the show and who share so authentically. If this stuff is interesting to you, then don't hesitate to take our quiz. We created a free quiz for you to at least know which area of non-monogamy you want to dip your toes into, because as Fernanda was saying, there's a huge difference between identifying and practicing in an open relationship than in a polyamorous relationship. So definitely check that quiz out. There is a link in our show notes. Take a moment to rate and review the podcast, share it with people who you think would benefit from it, and definitely get the dictionary. The dictionary is a great resource and a tool for you, so you're not walking around saying polygamy when you mean polyamory. Lots of free tools and more. Um, Making sure that you follow Open Late on TikTok, where we share fun, funny, and educational, sometimes content. And until next week, lovers and friends, this is your host, Jessica Spandiari. See you soon.